everyone. I'm Wendell Jones. I'm the ambassador of the Bahamas to the United States of America. Welcome to the second in a series of our conversations with members of the Bahamian diaspora in the United States of America. The embassy in Washington, D.C., in collaboration with all the consular offices, we have reached out to outstanding Bahamians across the United States who are excelling in various spheres of life, in the professions, to talk about what they are doing and their aspirations for the Bahamas. At the Summit of the Americas held recently in Los Angeles, Prime Minister Philip Davis talked about the 3 C's. He mentioned climate, COVID, and conflict. He spoke to the hemispheric leaders on taking action in dealing with these 3 C's, particularly climate change. He underscored, of course, conflicts in the world and how they are impacting the Bahamas. In the session today, we have 6 notable Bahamians to speak about the challenges we face in the Bahamas and how we can overcome them and how we can deal with these challenges for the future development and growth of the Bahamas. I'm so pleased to welcome as our guests in this webinar today, Kendra T. Sayers, who has a PhD in microbiology. I'm going to allow them to talk about themselves. Michelle Wallace-Rencher, a PhD in organizational leadership. Giovanni Moss, who has a master's in public administration. And we have also with us Rachel Chandler, who is in mathematics. She has a BSc there, and she is a senior systems engineer. Professor Kevin Storr, PhD in physics, and Professor Gregory Carey, who has a PhD in biochemistry. And so we have a panel here today that, as they say, is heavy on material. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our webinar today. Let's begin with Ms. Sayers. Tell us some more about yourself.
Thank you for the invitation to be here. It's a pleasure to be in such esteemed company. I am from Nassau, New Providence. I am a graduate of St. Anne's High School. I earned my bachelor's in microbiology at the University of the West Indies Cable Campus, and then earned my PhD from the University of Maryland here in Baltimore, where I'm now a research associate. My primary interest has been microbial pathogenesis, so I am interested in understanding how pathogens make us sick, and now working on ways to prevent that. So I'm in a translational group. We work on vaccines against non-typhoidal strains of Salmonella. And so that it wasn't my original path, but it's sort of where I wound up going from basic science to more translational work.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Michelle Wallace-Rencher.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency, and of course, so happy to meet all of you on this panel today. I am a native of Nassau, Bahamas also, but unlike Dr. Sayers, I did not attend St. Anne's. I actually am a Jolly Green Giant from St. John's College. And so beyond my St. John's studies, I attended university in Ohio, got my engineering degree. I got my master's degree as an MBA with a concentration in strategy, and I just completed my PhD in organizational leadership, as you mentioned. So currently, I have the honor of serving the great state of Tennessee. I am the change manager, and as we all know, change is never comfortable for anybody. But my role is that of leading technology change across the entire state of Tennessee, making certain that the state is not only secure, but that it remains relevant to exactly what's happening around the world when it comes to technology, when it comes to application, when it comes to infrastructure. So I lead change. I am the STS change manager across the entire state, and I have that discipline primarily because I have worked in a variety of disciplines around the country. I worked in the retail space, I've worked in healthcare as a technologist, but most of all of my roles have led me to where I am today, where I basically work to impact organizations, making certain that they learn how to embrace change and that they are ready for what's coming and what's going to be next. And so I'm excited to be a part of this discussion today, as you can tell.
Well, you're going to tell us how we in the Bahamas can embrace change and...
Absolutely. That's my forte. Love it all day long.
Very good. Okay, we'll get to that. Rachel Chandler.
Hello, Your Excellency, and hello, everyone else on the phone and listening in. My name is Rachel Chandler. I was born in Nassau, raised for the first 5 years of my life in Abaco in Marsh Harbor. And then my family moved to Massachusetts, where my father is from, and we lived there throughout most of my education. So I went to elementary, middle, and high school in Massachusetts. I then went on to Stonehill College, which is a small Catholic school in Massachusetts, and I earned my Bachelor of Science in Math. While I was there, I started interning at Raytheon, which is now a larger company. We've just gone through a large merger with United Technologies. So I've been working there for around 5 years. My office focuses on maritime systems. So our main customer is the Navy. And most recently, I was on a program where I was doing a lot of hands-on experimentation, working with hardware and software routing capabilities, and I spent a lot of time out at sea. So I'm coming back from a hectic schedule, and I'm starting to get into some other management type roles and pursuit type roles, which have been very interesting. And I think all of you are inspiring me to maybe further my education. I've been thinking about potentially getting my master's in ocean engineering or oceanography, because that is the space that I work in most closely. So thinking about that for the fall.
Good. Okay, let's hear from Giovanni Moss.
Good afternoon, Ambassador, and my esteemed colleagues. Again, Giovanni Moss. I also was born in Nassau, stayed there until the age of 17, where I attended the St. Augustine's College. Finished my high school career in South Florida, where I had an aspiration to play baseball. So stayed there since my junior year in high school. After high school, I attended Florida Atlantic University, where I received a bachelor's of public management. And then a few years later, as I started working in local government, went to Nova Southeastern University for a master's in public administration. So my as far as my career, most of it has been as a public servant at the local level. I became the first Black director for a local city in South Florida, and served as the Housing Community Development Director, Redevelopment Director, and Community Development Director. So about 5 years ago, I jumped into the consulting field working for large disaster recovery firms. And so I've currently manage projects between $25 million to $1 billion, assisting large entities as far as state of Florida, USVI, Puerto Rico, in administration of their federal appropriations. So I'm currently a director of strategic partnerships for a large firm called Tetra Tech, which is a 20,000 employee firm, have offices all over the world. And I have the pleasure of selecting our teaming partners in our markets, focus on, bringing up minority companies, women-owned, Black-owned. So that's my current position, in addition to managing a number of large projects within those territories as far as USVI, Puerto Rico, and Florida. So it's a pleasure again to be on this panel with such esteemed colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Kevin Storr.
Yes, hi, good afternoon to everyone, Your Excellency, and to everyone else on the panel. So I'm not a big red machine or a jolly green giant. I'm a golden eagle from L.W. Young, right there on Burnett Road, born and raised in Kemp Road. And so I'm currently serving as the coordinator of physics at my university at Prairie View A&M University. I actually did my undergraduate work here at Prairie View, which is an HBCU. Many of you might be familiar with that. and did my PhD work at Florida State University. Go Seminoles. And so my work involves low temperature condensed matter physics. So the materials that you find inside your electronics, like your cell phone, your watches, laptop, tablets, and such, before those materials are placed in there, I'm a person that would study those. And I do a lot of grant writing. So for those who are in academia and such, and certain Dr. Sayers would know to keep the pipeline going, you have to keep getting that funding. And I was fortunate enough to get a funding a few weeks ago for about $460,000. And over the past 14 months, it's been a very good period. I've gotten $1.2 million in funding over the past 14 months. So I work with graduate students. I'm pleased to say one of my former undergraduate students who was from Nassau, we now have him in graduate school at Florida A&M University working on a PhD in physics, and he should be completing probably in the next 2 years. And so I'm looking forward to sharing this digital space with the rest of you for the period that we have allotted.
Very good. Okay, let's hear from Dr. Gregory Carey.
Good afternoon. And again, it's a pleasure to be on with this distinguished panel. And I think I'm outnumbered, but I hopefully am not outgunned by Nassau. It's just Nassau. So representing the Out Islands, specifically Luther.
Very good.
And more specifically, South Luther, Tarpon Bay to be exact. That's where I hail from. Educated at Tarpon Bay Primary and went on to Windermere to complete high school. And I'm going to give a shout out to College of the Bahamas as well, alumnus of COB from 1986. From there, moving up to VCU in Richmond to complete bachelor's in biology with chemistry minor, and then completing my PhD in biochemistry at VCU, which was joint then with Medical College of Virginia, called VCU MCV, and now it's fully VCU. So I studied lymphoma biology as a graduate student, very interested in cancer signaling. That's where it began. Several postdocs in cancer biology, tumor and liquid cancers, specifically looking at signaling mechanisms and how to interrupt them to essentially try to get better ideas on stopping cancer, lymphoma proliferation, and survival. In my second postdoc, that's where I actually met a world-renowned immunologist, Dr. David Scott. And he introduced me to immunology. I was a biochemist by training, but he said, I think you've got the chops to learn how to be an immunologist. And I said, there's no way. But he was right. And Condra's laughing because she knows the rest of the story as well. But I actually am an immunologist by osmosis. So I teach graduate level immunology, healthcare immunology as well. And I've done lymphoma biology studies, and in addition to cancer studies. Condra's and my path crossed. Now, Kevin, I'm going to get a one-up on you here. You have a student you're trying to get into the States to get to a PhD. Condra was an undergraduate in my lab at the Red Cross before she came up to the University of Maryland School of Medicine and completed a PhD. So I have the distinct honor of being on with one of the most talented young undergraduates I had in that lab ever, and she's making her mark here at the University of Maryland School of Medicine here in Baltimore. So quite proud to be here.
Very good. It's a pleasure to have all of you here, and I'm impressed with the number of things that all of you have been doing here in the United States over the many years. And hopefully from this program today, we are able to excite and inspire other young Bahamians to achieve. And so let's start the conversation in earnest, and hopefully all of you can participate in all of the questions that I am going to have for you, or the comments that you all would make. And so feel free to jump in from time to time, because it is a conversation that we are having. Firstly, let me ask you, and I want to begin with Michelle, because she was very enthusiastic earlier on. There are many crises percolating in the world today. The Bahamas is, of course, a small developing country. And from your perspective, how are we dealing with these crises in the world? And all of you can have a word on that. Let's begin with Michelle Rencher.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I love to start the conversation. I think as well as we can when it comes to how are we handling all the crises. Of course, you mentioned climate, you mentioned obviously the pandemic that we are all coming out of. But I do believe that considering our size, considering where we sit in the global conversation, the fact that we are in these global conversations, I think is extremely important. But I think we're handling them as best we possibly can, given our expertise, given what we currently have on the ground. I think the Bahamas is doing an excellent job. Can we do better? Absolutely. I think every country can do better. I live in Tennessee, and there is a lot that my organization can do better. But I think the question is not so much about if we're doing well or not well. I think the question is what's next. We have survived since 2020 because we're all here. But those of us who are in this conversation are not only here since the pandemic, most of us are old enough to remember Y2K. And the fact that the world survived Y2K and that we're now surviving this stage of the pandemic of COVID-19, and that there's so much more happening when it comes to climate control. There's so much that's happening when it comes to security and technology spaces. There is a lot more that the Bahamas and the world can do.
Okay, can we hear from, let's go to Kendra. Kendra says, Dr. says.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. So I think we could be doing a lot more. When I think about where we are and sort of what we've experienced in the last decade, particularly as it pertains to emerging infectious diseases. So several years ago, there was the chikungunya outbreak. Before that, it was Zika. And we are sort of, when you look at how these pathogens sort of spread across the world, those two viruses in particular, we were sort of right in the mix. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement in that space, you know, sort of understanding the epidemiology, studying these pathogens, preparing our populations for them. And we saw that even with COVID, right? We could be doing a better job, I think, in that area. And it requires, I think, more investment in the sciences and in biological sciences, both on the research side of things and in the medical space. So also like tracking the impact that these diseases have on our populations, because there's the immediate impact, right? The acute infections, but what seems to be sort of the larger story is the chronic impact that they have on our health. And we have aging populations that are now having to deal with the effects of, people who talk about the joint pain that resulted from chikungunya, birth defects as a result of Zika virus, COVID that seems to be targeting a lot of different organs and causing chronic illnesses even in children. So I think, from that perspective, we have a lot of room to grow into that space to better prepare ourselves, because, the planet we don't seem to be handling or trying to combat climate change as quickly as we need to. And we are going to continue to feel the brunt of it, not only just like seeing stronger hurricanes, but just seeing more, I think, of changes in the pathogens that we're going to have to be dealing with and the health concerns that are coming out of, or the impact of climate change.
Dr. Carey, we have been dealing with many issues, but the pandemic caused a backlog of many situations in the healthcare system. And there are a whole lot of people who have been suffering from non-communicable diseases. And a whole lot of them went unattended during the pandemic. Speak to that.
Well, I'll back up just a little bit too. You talk about climate change and what kinds of issues we have to address. I can tell you, I can remember growing up in Eleuthera and going to the beach and to the water, driving down to Savannah Sound, as one of my colleagues has roots and family there. And I feel like every time I go back home, the sea seems to be getting a little bit further up the beach.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a clear and present danger for us. I remember places we used to go to the beach. Some of the beaches are eroded. The water seems to be coming up higher, or the erosion is worse whenever there's a storm, and not even necessarily a major storm. So in terms of a challenge, it challenges to the Bahamas, the infrastructure and survival. I think this is an area we must address now. How do we do that? I think renewable energy. They always ask, what do you have a whole lot of, and how can you use that to mitigate the issues that are happening? So solar power. I think that's where are our next generations of engineers and STEM folks, science, technology, engineering, and math people, who can be trained and bring their abilities to bear on this problem or if not clear and present, certainly it might get worse before it gets better. And so that's actually one of the spaces that I work in, and I didn't say all of my full activities. I'm Assistant Dean of Student Research Education. I'm also Executive Director of Student Research and Community Outreach as well. So I work with the community, and in my spare time, I actually lead 3 programs for postbacks, medical students, and undergraduate pipelines into science by PhD tracks and medicine. So I would like to see programs develop where we get more young Bahamians involved in STEM, but whether that's medicine or engineering, science, math, etc. And for those persons who are dealing with chronic illnesses, Your Excellency, persons who have been left behind with long COVID, to educate the healthcare professionals that can work and deal with that. Better education as well for vaccine use and uptake. Dr. Sears is better equipped to speak to this than I am, but vaccine hesitancy caused serious issues in the local Baltimore Baltimore community. And it caused a lot of issues. I had family who were resisting the vaccination and now dealing with the effects of long COVID. And it's not only a health issue, a family burden, there's also the economic impact of that. So every viable person who comes out of the workforce, community, charity, to the churches, et cetera, it's a resource that we've lost. So it's bigger than just immediate and acute in dealing with the infectious disease there and then. It's dealing with the economy and community fabric as well. So I'd like to see a better training. I think the Bahamas is primed to have more students, more young people, more trainees being trained in STEM, because critical thinking and research-based problem solving can be applied anywhere. I'm sure that Dr. Rencher might tell you the same thing. Once you get those skills and you can research a problem and you figure out what resources you have to answer the problem systematically or tackle the problem, then you can deal with these issues, whether they're acute, chronic, or even future threats as well, economically as well. So those are the kinds of things I'd like to see the Bahamas becoming a lot more aggressive on, maybe a little bit less service industry focused, a little bit more STEM, science, technology, engineering. And I'll close with this statement, I'll stop at this statement. If we educate the next generation of software engineers, you don't need a whole lot of infrastructure to do a lot of programming and create knowledge. You can do that on a laptop. Some of these kids are doing amazing things inside a laptop. And that's what we learned during COVID's gift to us was we couldn't be in the labs. So we had to take all that data and all that mind power and via laptops and remote access into databases, they produced papers, knowledge, created systems, platforms for us to deploy knowledge and to get knowledge into faraway places, to get out to Inagua, Zoom. You get the technology infrastructure, boom, there you are.
Exactly.
So I'm excited.
If I could piggyback on your thought, Dr. Curie, you had an excellent point. You talked about trying to get more Bahamian students into STEM studies. I think one of the challenges that we have in the Bahamas is not so much that we don't have enough people interested in STEM. We can always have more. I think the problem, and I studied this in my study for my PhD program, was that I wanted to understand why are Bahamians leaving and seldom returning. And I think that is absolutely. But I just wanted to say, if I could put a plug in there, it's not that we're not going into STEM. We're going, we're just not returning. Okay, let's engage Ms. Chandler here, because I believe that as a systems engineer and a mathematician, you are quite able to speak to exactly what Dr. Carey mentioned.
Yeah, of course. So I think pulling the thread on the climate change, my industry is oftentimes very laser focused in defense. We have orders from the Navy or whatever other government entity that we have to fulfill. And sometimes there are people that only want to fulfill those things and don't think outside of the box in the innovative space. Luckily, something that I've seen with my network of people I work with is that we are trying to see how can our systems that get deployed kilometers into the ocean, into deep water, how can we energize them without the use of big batteries or oil? Can we harvest, from the environment that it's in to power these things for a long period of time? And so I really hope that more research and investment dollars go into that development, because I could see how we could potentially deploy some of these systems in places like the Bahamas. It's a perfect environment for them. And I think, having that STEM expertise coming from the Bahamas gives opportunity for those things to happen. I think, there's a lot that's going to happen before anything like that gets hardened and fabricated. But I think, there's a lot of great people within the Bahamas that could, fully uphold that whole system. So that's sort of what I'm trying to veer in with my career, is more dual use technology, because we've been able to solve our problems for years and years, but how can we solve twofold problems and also bring in different types of industry and, really make change? So I have been focusing on climate change and the little impacts that I can make in my big company, but there are a lot of smaller businesses that have been deploying their systems in remote areas. And I really hope that evolves into something larger and moves across the globe, because I just think that's a huge opportunity space.
Dr. Starr, you are a physicist, and I believe that this conversation is right up your alley, eh? Yes?
Yes. So in the context of the larger question that was asked, so at this point, I reside and work in Texas, in Houston. And so therefore, as far as my interaction with home, of course, it's limited in terms of being able to know exactly how things are going. My feedback is basically I have peers who are, say, at the University of the Bahamas and other professionals, what I read and so forth. And I think, one of the first things I think about is, in addressing it, is so there are individuals at home who are at work functioning, doing their best, making inroads and so forth. And so the first thing I would want to be very kind of cautious about is, I guess, how I try to frame a situation that I am not intimately involved in. So for me, the thing I think about is, how can I, as a professional over here, be of assistance? So, for example, when just looking at the panel and reading the tagline at the bottom and such, that in the context of some of the major issues which are actually occurring, one of the things I think that can be of value would be to actually maximize individuals who are professionally targeted, whether in academia or in the corporate context, to be able to work together, whether that in terms of maybe some type of alliance, or maybe being an advisory board or such, to help provide direction for those who are already there. I think of it from the perspective of, growing up at home, many times, when the younger folks came back from school and they had their degrees and they go into the workplace, that there was always this kind of tug between those who have been holding things down the younger ones have the newer ideas, and they're like, oh, why aren't you doing it this way? And then the other ones who have been there holding it down, they feel threatened because now, okay, you just made it here. I've been on the ground having to deal with this, and now you're. So for me, I want to make sure that us with our PhDs and everything else and letters behind our names, that the suggestions that we have, the experience that we have, that can be incorporated, that is first presented in a very, and I'm not saying it's not being done that way by no means, in a very a meaningful light. So one of the things that Dr. Carey mentioned that I was going to mention as well is in terms of our involvement with the schools. So for example, I've when I go home, I'll periodically go back and speak at my old high school at L.W. Young and some of the other places and such, or even at the churches. And I think one thing of value would be for us to more or less determine what is already in motion, right? And so that now with some of the exposure, that more advanced exposure we may have by virtue of being involved in high-end research and other collaborations and such, that then now what are some meaningful things that we can actually do to assist? In regards to the students, I think one of the things that I'm actually strongly interested in is how to incorporate maybe bringing some of the students over during the summertime. So how we have these OREU programs. I mean, so there are programs, I'm certain, for us who are individually associated with universities, whereby if even, say, maybe initially 2 students are going to come over and spend 10 weeks working in the lab, getting exposure, whether those students are maybe juniors in high school who have an interest towards STEM, or maybe those who are at the University of the Bahamas and wanting to give them exposure by now they're thinking more about continuing on their studies, or maybe even going to graduate school. The other aspect I thought about would be just even in terms of knowing a scientist. I'm just using a random term here, on television, right? That perhaps maybe once a week or so on some program, different scientists are highlighted. Dr. Carey is on, and he's speaking to the nation of young people, or whether those things are prepared whereby the students in schools have to watch them as a part of some type of curriculum to know about some of the science that's being done by Bahamians abroad and what's actually available. So the thing is that I look at it in terms of more or less how do we incorporate that younger generation who is going to more or less move over from us, because for us who are involved right now, it becomes very easy to get involved with your research and what you're doing, and then the Bahamas becomes like this.
Okay.
Right.
Dr. Scott,
that's my initial thoughts.
Dr.
Yes.
Scott, I know that we can even go on and on, but we have some more questions for you. I wanted to go to Giovanni Moss, and when I read his resume, it talked about being a leading his company, a leading global provider of consulting and engineering services with a focus on water, environment, sustainable infrastructure, renewable energy, and international development. Again, this conversation, Mr. Moss, you are the Director of Strategic Administration?
Partnerships, yes.
Yes. Speak to the issue of these crises and how we in the Bahamas are dealing with them.